And just a few words before I invite Dwayne to the mic. Dwayne has won several awards in Canada, too many for me to list out. But just a few, he was inducted to the Scarborough Walk of Fame, which is hosted at the Scarborough Town Center. He has won many, the Harry Jerome Award for Excellence, and he is the winner of 3 Canadian Urban Music Awards. His career started back in 1993, and Dwayne also had the pleasure to perform to US President Barack Obama, as well as one of our past Governor Generals, Michel Jean, and our late NDP leader, Jack Layton. I don't know where he found the time, but Dwayne already has written 13 books. Just an incredible accomplishment. Dwayne also is into film, and today he's the producer and host of 2 TV shows, Poetically Speaking and Right in Toronto. Clearly, he also has strong ties to the arts community internationally. He has worked with Russell Peters, Alicia Keys, and with our own and dear Canadian artist, Drake. So by way of no further introduction, let me introduce you to Dwayne Morgan. Dwayne, welcome.
Thank you very much for that great introduction. It is always an honor to represent Scarborough, do things that are about Scarborough, be involved in anything Scarborough, just because that is, I'm such a great product of my environment and where I grew up. And I have lived a life beyond what I imagined for myself. I've had a lot of fun in life. I had no idea that, people ask me all the time, how do you live off of poetry? Because for the last 28 years, poetry has been my job. I've never had a real job, as they call it. I've lived off of my art and off of my creativity. And I just feel so grateful that I am able to do something that I love and enjoy, and get to travel the world and see all sorts of different things and meet a lot of different people. So today, I'm going to share some of my work with you, especially as it pertains to contemporary issues that people in the Black community might be dealing with and might be facing. 2020 was a very interesting year for a lot of people. A lot of people, their eyes were open to social justice issues, anti-Black racism, systemic racism, a lot of, these things. And one of the things I've been doing this year is, saying to people, for everybody who was so appalled and were just woken up to these realities last year, ask yourself what a privilege it has been to live a life not knowing that that was happening, not knowing that that was the reality that other people were living and dealing with and going through. And now that we realize that that is a reality, what are we going to do about it? Because all of us have circles of influence, and it's a matter of how do we use our circles of influence, our power, our privilege, where we have it, to move the conversations forward. So this first poem I'm going to do is based on thoughts that I had when I found out that I was going to become a father some years ago. It was 4 a.m. when she woke me, and I can still remember the cold sweat on the back of my neck like it was yesterday. 13 years have now passed, and I can still remember the pregnancy test in my hand and how it felt like my heart and my world had stopped simultaneously. And nobody knows this. But at every doctor's visit, as he would perform routine ultrasounds, I would look from the ground to the screen, hoping, praying to God that none of the squiggly lines that I was seeing would confirm this little being as a boy. And I don't feel good about it. But I've lived a long time in skin despised simply for its hue, so every November I go poppyless, not out of disrespect. I'm just not a fan of Remembrance Day, remembering that there has never been a plane sent to save us. We are the displaced. Our bodies and religion stolen. We were given a new prophet as they used us to make profits. Ask Nike what a Black man is worth. For hundreds of years, we've been killed as a form of amusement, gunned down with no fear of repercussions. So don't blame me for not wanting to be burdened by the birth of a Black boy born into a world built on his back, forcing me to teach him how to write and his rights, knowing that even my greatest efforts can't keep him alive when his skin is a threat. So yes, I stood there, staring blankly at a screen, hoping, praying to God that none of the squiggly lines that I was seeing would confirm this little being as a boy. Maybe having a girl would increase my chances of not having a child who'd grow up to be a hashtag trending, because the killing of Black men has been a trend since forever. So we write Black Lives Matter, not to try to inform others, but to try to convince ourselves in a world that is constantly showing us otherwise. And my heart can't help but break for those parents who have had their children snatched from their lives. It was an April afternoon when I found myself pacing around a delivery room, wondering if my prayers would be answered. At 3:20, the most precious little girl was presented to me, and I cried uncontrollably for hours, knowing that I had just been blessed. Not because having a girl would make her worth more, but because we live in a world where Black boys will always be worth less. So that is a reality of some of what is happening in our world right now, that people who look like me are dealing with, facing on a daily basis, on a regular occurrence. This next one that I'm going to share with you, the first part is inspired by a study that was done in the 70s, and then the second part was inspired by my experience with my daughter. Michelle, age 4, white. Michelle, which doll is the pretty one? The white one. Raquel, age 4, white. Raquel, which doll is the mean one? The Black one. Natasha, age 4, Black. Natasha, which doll is the nice one? The white one. Keisha, age 4, Black. Keisha, which doll is the ugly one? The Black one. Keisha, which doll looks like you? The Black one. By the age of 4, the seed of racism, self-hatred, and inferiority is already subconsciously planted in the brain. Like sugarcane, like cotton, like cash crops that will benefit those who grow it more than those who sow it, and don't I know it. As the father of a daughter who struggles to see herself on store shelves, these are little Black girl blues. You can find darker hued versions of white dolls that look nothing like you, straight hair, straight nose, forcing parents to have to straighten things out, removing the kinks of self-doubt, becoming vigilant, parenting, becoming militant, but only if they get it. Only if they understand the damage being done and the need to protect her identity by any means necessary. Birthday invitations included the postscript, "Please no white dolls," which created their fair share of conversations. Protection seen as reverse hatred. The few dolls of a lighter hue that managed to sneak past our border wall soon found themselves missing like Native women in Canada. It is funny, this little thing called race, how it plays out from day to day and has us worshiping things that look nothing like us, whether dolls on store shelves or their version of Jesus. And these little things are always so much bigger, which is why she forgets cartoons, but remembers every detail from Hidden Figures. And some will still see this as nothing. But I saw her desire to become a doctor after watching Doc McStuffins, because representation matters. It matters to see yourself reflected in the society in which you live, not as a cliche or stereotype, but just as normal and positive. And maybe this is too much to ask. When the fabric of our economic quilt happens to be anti-Black, periodically I will ask, if you could, is there anything about yourself that you would change? At 13 years of age, her answer has remained the same. No, I'm pretty awesome. Yes, you are, I always reply. Fist of pride held high, beaming on the inside, emanating out proud that there's one less Black girl who refuses to play and be shaped by society's dollhouse. So the importance in sharing that poem is that walking through the doll aisle in Walmart, in Toys R Us, is an educational experience. Because when you walk through and you see no doll that looks like you, it tells you your place in society. Even before you are even old enough to understand it, it tells you you are not desirable, You don't fit in. Nobody wants you. And then you look and you see what dolls are here. And it tells you who is valued, who is important, who is fun to play with. So then, even as I said in the poem, sometimes our young girls get dolls and the doll is, they just made the skin darker, but all the features are still, white features. The hair is still white hair. And that child sits there and she's combing this white hair and her mother is struggling to comb her hair. And she's wondering, how come my hair isn't like this? And the seeds of inferiority, the seeds that something is wrong with me, are being planted very subconsciously. And so when we talk about systemic racism, this is how subtly it is woven into the fabric of our society. Now, as I said before, one of the things that is very important is for us to look at, in my own circles of influence, how can I use my power and privilege for change? So the last poem I'm going to share right now. And when my daughter was younger, she would always bring me these stories to read. They always had some woman, girl, princess, and she's going through life and life is awesome. And then she gets to a fork in the road and needs some boy, man, prince to come and save the day. And I was like, these books are horrible. I have no desire to participate in any of this. So I had to figure out, how do I use my power and privilege as a man to begin moving the conversation in a different direction around gender? So we all have to look at where we have power and how we can use that power and privilege to move things to a more equitable place. So I had to create my own fairy tale for my daughter, and then I put it out as a children's book. And this is going to be my final word for the night to make sure that we are staying on time. I look forward to bedtime. I let her choose whatever story she wants to read, and then I wait to see what adventures we find. Time after time, I've come to realize that there are dangers that lurk on bookshelves. Words and sentences used to affirm the imaginations of boys while leaving girls to wonder if they're good enough to find their prince. And to think that we socialize girls to find their prince charming while never teaching boys how to be charming. I find this alarming. So allow me to tell you some things that these books refuse to in this life. You had better learn how to take care of yourself. There's no man coming to save you, but one who will always have your back. As a matter of fact, the man that you choose to love might end up being the one that you need to be protected from. As a matter of fact, your knight in shining armor might come riding in a plaid shirt, stilettos, or both. Who knows? Keep your options open. As a matter of fact, you might even end up alone, and that is also okay, because there's no reason to believe that you don't already have everything that you need and that some man is going to come and magically make you complete when you are far from a damsel in distress. Look at this world that we live in. If there's anyone that needs saving, it's probably men. So don't just spend your days only fantasizing about a wedding when there's so much adventure to be had. You can be an astronaut and fly to the moon. You can be an animator who invents cartoons. You can be a chemist or a mechanical engineer. You can be a makeup artist, help people style their hair. You can be anything that you want under the sun. But always remember that if a frog comes up to you and asks for a kiss, the first thing you should do is run, because playing princesses is cool, but there's no reason to believe that your self-worth should be tied to the views of one who sees you as more destined for the sidelines and being in the game. I don't work this hard for you to not slay. So for every young girl who dreams big dreams, who wants to do things this world has never seen, you go, girl. Show off your magic. Be awesome. Make it a habit. Don't sit and be silent. Raise your voice and make noise. Embrace your imagination and leave the fairy tales to the boys. Thank you all very much for having me.
Thank you.
And
Wonderful.
Well, Dwayne, thank you very much. And before you go, I hadn't personally been a fan of poets per se, but this evening, I think you've made a difference in my life, and I'm going to really check it out. So just quickly, I mean, one of the things I admire about what you did is how you embraced your fatherhood, your baby girl, at age 4, and the types of things that you taught her. And I wish I had you around when my little baby girl was growing up, because I could certainly use some of these messages. So thank you very much. I could see why we made you a hero, and you won so many awards. And I want to wish you, on behalf of the board and Scro, All the best in selling your books and in your movies and films. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you all so much. I put a link in the chat, so if anybody wants to find me, there's a link in the chat and you can find me there. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
We will. Thank you very much. And you yourself have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay, folks. So that was our small little feature, but a big step with Dwayne. So Dwayne, again, thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to our main speaker. I guess Jared is Andrew here as yet? Oh yeah, there he is. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so in this next session, we're going to move to our features main speaker. Andrew Arifuzzaman will be with us for the next hour. He will speak, or 45 minutes, sorry. He will speak for 30 minutes, and then we'll open up the calls for questions. So if you have questions, you could put them in the call section, and we'll come to those a little later. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Andrew. Some of you may already know him. He's the Chief Administrative Officer at the University of Toronto Scarborough campus. And I recently had an opportunity to see Andrew present all the great things that they're doing in building out the Scarborough campus. He's been part of several organizations. He's been at the Scarborough campus for 13 years. And he's really been a leader in driving the change that you see if you happen to pass along Ellesmere or Military Trail and see the expansion. Andrew is a significant player in that. He's a part of that as well has been the work he's done in helping create the Toronto Pan Am Center. Prior to getting to the Toronto Scarborough campus, he worked for the CAMH, the Center of Addiction and Mental Health. He had several leadership positions in there as Director of Clinical Operations. And he's also very active, being a resident within Scarborough. He's been very active in the Scarborough Walk of Fame, the Ontario Center for Mental Health Sciences, and the Pan Am Center as well. He's an undergraduate at York University, as well as he did his master's at Rotman. But if you think that he wasn't busy enough, he's also a professional diving instructor. For those of you who are interested in diving, and if you don't understand what he is going to speak to you about, he's going to present in English. But if you don't understand what he said in English, he could repeat the presentation for you in German, because he's also bilingual in German. So welcome, Andrew. Turning it over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, John. And just to be clear, it's scuba diving and not platform diving, though I will jump in off my platforms. If you have any interest in scuba diving, I'm and particularly my passion is diving with big sharks. So if you have that interest, it's always good to have a spare on that particular kind of diving. I thought I would give a presentation today talking about anchor institutions and some of the things that we're up to here in Scarborough. I will just add a bit of a caveat. I'm going to try to keep my camera on, but I may shut my camera off because spending the last 333 days sitting in my home office has caused some back problems. So by the time I get to this point of the day, I sometimes just have to stand. And so I might shut my camera off just so that I can stand. And I will get up my presentation now. Second here. There we go. And I think for some of you, you may have seen pieces of this, but I'm hoping to kind of tell a big story. And as I was putting the slides together, it came to me that we've actually developed or established quite a bit since we started the sort of anchor strategy. So I'm going to kind of walk through where we are, some of the things that are happening, and talk about how we can move forward. And so I'm going to start by talking about anchor institutions. And so what are anchor institutions? And the anchors are now, the phrase is being used much more often. But anchor institutions are place-based institutions. We are where we are, and we're going to stay here for a long time. We think of things over a long term. For some people, you may think that things move really slowly, but things move slowly because if you think of buildings, for example, we think of buildings that last 100 years or 200 years. It's a very different time scale than a lot of others that build buildings, for example. And when we're creating an anchor strategy, it's not a passive reality of being, but rather it's an active exercise of engaging, right? And so there's lots of big organizations, institutions, companies that move into places, and they figure by their presence of being there, things are going to get better for the people around it. And our real um, emphasis is on it's an active engagement. It's constantly evolving and constantly changing. And the key thing is also that anchors are not about charity, right? So often people look at big institutions and say, well, they have so much of this, they should give us things. And the reality is we may have lots of things, but we don't have very much to give. So we're always looking for reciprocity. What are the kinds of things that we can do that create some general good for the community? And then how does that actually help us with our mission? And I'll talk a little bit more about some examples of this as we go forward. You see a lot of the anchor strategies founded in places that have gone through real crisis. Detroit had gone bankrupt a decade ago. Fortunately, there was some Scarborough investors who are now in the midst of opening a casino out in Pickering, who bought a lot of downtown Detroit because properties were so cheap. And that is now starting to turn. And another big one is Cleveland. And people often think of Cleveland as really being, that sort of place on the bottom of Lake Erie that no one ever goes to and LeBron James is from. But Cleveland was the heart of American economy just over 100 years ago. And it has now evolved into something very different. And then we got to a point where there's a stretch of road in Cleveland that starts in downtown Cleveland that ends at the Cleveland Clinics, that the life expectancy of somebody, a man on the west side of that stretch of road, was 10 to 12 years shorter than somebody who lived on 6 kilometers down the road. And their governments were trying, economy was failing. Cleveland started turning things around because anchor institutions, the Cleveland Clinics, the university hospital system, Case University, all got together and said, we can do something to improve the quality of life. So that's just a bit of context around anchor institutions. And Cleveland now has really turned it around. And if you get a chance to go, it's really becoming quite a remarkable place again. And just a bit of context. So Toronto is thriving. We have more tower cranes operating in Toronto than in New York, Chicago, and LA combined. And so we always hear these wonderful stories about how great Toronto is doing. And, in Scarborough, we're part of this. But the reality is that a lot of this great stuff that's happening isn't really benefiting our community. And so one of the things that I did is I went back and I started looking at some economic data. And so this is 1970. I picked this year because it was the year that I was born. And what you'll see is this dark line that I'm highlighting here is Victoria Park. And everything east is Scarborough. And when you look at what Scarborough was like in 1970, it was either middle income, high, or very high income. There were pockets of Scarborough. And so Scarborough was really thriving. When you look at the downtown core, which are these red dots, and then the very deep red, Toronto itself was not doing particularly well. And there was a lot of poverty. And then over time, that began to change. And so jump ahead 30 years, all of a sudden, the downtown core is becoming less and less poor, and poverty is now getting pushed out to the east and to the west. It's gentrifying, and there's more and more economic wealth that's building up along the subway line to the north and in pockets in the west. Then you jump ahead to 2012, and you actually see that even further. So now in Scarborough, it is all low income, with the exception of the areas around the lake, and a couple of pockets as you get up towards Agincourt. The West is becoming more and more wealthy, moving to middle incomes, and you also have a pocket in Etobicoke that is actually struggling, much like Scarborough is. And so this is the economic reality of what that actually looks like. What I found interesting is then I superimposed the layer of how do people vote? And so this was the first mayoral election with Tory. And you see there's a complete overlap that the areas of lower economic success in the East and the West voted Ford. The downtown core and along the lake, the higher wealth areas voted Tory. And so economically, there's something, or politically, there's something that's going on with those regions. And then I took, this is the most recent piece, and this is the impact on COVID, right? So when you look at COVID, you can see that in the high wealth areas, COVID is actually relatively low. It's in the lowercase counts. But as you get out to the east and to the west, you start to see more and more blue come in. And we're working on a project with Scarborough Health Network, and they provided some data to me in a discussion a couple of weeks ago. And the week before, Toronto had a COVID positivity rate of 8%. That sounds pretty good. The COVID positivity rate for the Scarborough area was 28.8%. So really what it's saying is that the COVID positivity rate in the downtown core was probably 2%. And when you average it all out and you take the big number from Scarborough, it drops it down to 8%. But there are significant issues and challenges that we have in Scarborough. And that's even further highlighted by what we see with public transit, right? And we've all been part of these discussions over the last decades about what's happening with public transit, and we need more public transit. So this is a wonderful map of what transit was supposed to look like for Scarborough, right? So we've got the Eglinton LRT coming up through Scarborough, connecting up to the Shepherd LRT, connecting it back to the subway. Well, as you all know, where we are right now is none of this exists. It's not in plan. None of this exists. It's not in plan. There was a recent announcement, I think today, if it's not out yet, about reinvesting some dollars to begin to build out this line. But really, Scarborough has 2 higher order transit stops, and it serves 680,000 people. That's the largest part of the city of Toronto, and it has 2 higher order transit stops. Something's not right. And so we think that with anchors, there's an opportunity for us to really change where Scarborough is going and what the success for Scarborough is. And I'll walk through a few reasons why. So one, there's been a historic underinvestment in Scarborough. There's always investments, both public and private investments all over the city. Historically, that number has been much lower for Scarborough. There is this challenge that Scarborough is still going through this conversion from basic manufacturing. It was always seen as a manufacturing sort of area, but a lot of those basic manufacturing jobs have left. We have potential anchor institutions. We have universities, colleges, hospitals, and we have interest growing from the private sector. There are things that are bringing national and international attention. So the Toronto Pan Am Sports Centre and the Pan Am Games brought a lot of attention to Scarborough. The Rouge National Park, it's actually a much bigger deal outside of where we live, around the world than what it actually is here, because it's sort of our backyard and we've known about it and used it. But the world is actually watching what's happening with the Rouge National Urban Park. There's a major development on the Golden Mile. That is a really important international development project, because one of the things that it's trying to address is the challenges that are global that have to do with suburbs and how suburbs work. And so we're involved with that development just to monitor, track, and share best practices and knowledge. And then we're working on a really exciting initiative called the Earth District, which I'll spend some time talking about. The other exciting thing about Scarborough is momentum is growing from the grassroots. So community partners are working together better than anywhere else in the city. I would argue better than anywhere else in the country. Not to say that we're completely there, but we're at the table talking to each other constantly. We have major institutional-led infrastructure investments. The university, the college, the hospital, the zoo, we're all making big investments. There's the Scarborough Business Association, which is now mobilized, and then there's SCRO, that there are people at the front line who are living here who are champions for Scarborough. And we have an opportunity to bring all of that together in a really cohesive, exciting way. And our model with anchor institutions is, how do we help our community thrive? And by thriving, it's not about what the suburbs were envisioned in the late 50s and 60s, which is bedroom communities, that you live and sleep in a place and then you work in a downtown core. That's led to nothing but traffic problems ultimately. And then it's also stratified our economy, it's stratified our socioeconomic system. So we want to create environments where people can work close to where they live, they can buy local things and engage with their local communities, because that's how we create thriving networks and thriving communities. And so we are really looking at a lot of the activities that we're doing on connecting these four dots so that this part of the city of Toronto and this region can actually thrive. Um, so anchor institutions are committing to the social and economic developments of our immediate communities. And I'll talk a lot about the kinds of things that we're working through, but you know, our key partners are places like Centennial College, the Toronto Zoo, the Scarborough Health Network, Ontario Shores, Parks Canada, as we move forward. And what we're all doing is we're trying to think about how to leverage every step of our activities to create broader intentional good for our community. And to us, this is it's now become embedded in how we think about our environment. And I'll walk through what some of that looks like. But the other piece is we have community partners who are very active and want to be at the table. um, Nowhere that I've come across is rich with resources where nobody needs anybody else to turn and help them with things. But what we have found is by partnering with organizations, we can actually drive good. I'll give a couple of examples about that. Um, and so as we're putting all of our planning together, we have what I refer to as micro plans, which are very detailed, targeted, small initiatives, and then macro initiatives, which are really intended to be sort of game changer kinds of initiatives. And I'll walk through a couple of those. So the first is this project we're working on with Centennial College. We now have also brought Trent University, Ontario Tech, and Durham College to the table. And we had a meeting yesterday with Trent, and they would like to bring Stanford Fleming to the table as well. And we've said our focus is really on the Eastern GTA, so that's fine. And what we're going to do is Earth stands for the Environmental and Related Technologies Hub, Earth District. For me, this was a bit of a play on a project I was involved in a couple decades ago when I was at CAMH called Mars, which many of you have probably heard about, which is the medical and related um, uh, sciences, or the Discovery District in downtown. So I've always said that they're sort of way up there, and this is a much more grounded initiative, which is how we came up with the Earth acronym. And so our focus is located in the Eastern GTA. It's the area between Scarborough and the Durham region. It's a cross-sector collaborative initiative. It's been led by the university and Centennial College, and we're committed to providing sector-focused research and comprehensive education to develop innovative technology-driven solutions that will fuel sustainable, resilient communities around the world. And some context to this. We are no longer doing basic manufacturing, but we have lots of manufacturing skills. So how do we upskill and do more advanced manufacturing? How do we as institutions leverage the investments we're making in new infrastructure to create marketplaces for these advanced technologies? And how do we use what we're doing to actually showcase how these technologies work? And I'll talk a bit more about that. The other piece is there have been all kinds of initiatives that have happened around the medical and medical sciences, around technology, around artificial intelligence. All of those things are very connected to the downtown core in Toronto. We kind of thought that the one area that the downtown core really can't do is manufacturing. It doesn't have the land. The land is too valuable. They can't build plants. We have all of that already in place, both in Scarborough and in the Eastern Durham region. So there's an opportunity for us to leverage a strength that already exists there, that we have lands, things are zoned in the right way, and we can move forward relatively quickly. So some of our guiding principles around the network, around this, is we want to bring together a network of active collaboration with a whole group of diverse stakeholders. We want to leverage the expertise and resources that already exist. We want to create opportunities for economic and social um, uh, impact as well as job creation. We want to create a physical hub. We envision having, as you enter the city of Toronto, as you enter the Durham region, big signs that say "Welcome to the Environmental and Related Technologies District." Um, and we want to enable the transfer of knowledge and share this knowledge. Many of the issues that we're dealing with right now are global issues, and how do we transmit what we're doing here in a global way? Um, so where we see this going, and I could give a whole hour and a half long talk on what we're doing with Earth, is that we're working to mobilize a work, live, study, play ecosystem for the Eastern GTA. And what we want to do is we want to create um, a high value cluster out here that's creating higher wages, it's creating jobs, it's generating significant tax revenue for government. We want to increase local educational training and research and development activities. We want to be a catalyst for the creation of high value startup companies. We want to support the development of clean tech and manufacturing, and we want to boost agriculture through innovations and partnerships. We're going to fill the gap between the Waterloo, Toronto, Ottawa innovation corridor. And we want to develop infrastructure and assets and technologies that can be replicated or parts thereof around our community. So this is really at a high level, and I'm not going to get into much more detail about this, but I'm happy to come back at some point and talk some more about this. And ultimately, the spectrum that we're looking at is by better education and clean tech development. Some of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve is improving educational attainment for the Eastern GTA. We want to drive more women for education attainment, particularly in the STEM areas. So that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We want to increase learning participation. We want to drive environmental education. And, right now I've already seen the Twitter feeds, the weather systems that have moved through Texas. People are saying, how can there be global warming if it's actually freezing and snowing in Texas? The point about global warming is that as certain parts of the mean temperature of the earth has increased, it changes the systems. Jet streams change, moisture levels change, winds change. And it's not that the whole world is going to get warmer, it's that as the earth warms, the world is changing around us. And so there's clearly, based on what I watched on CNN at 6 o'clock tonight, there's education that needs to get done. And it's about responsible consumption and production. And so this is kind of what we see doing. And where I think we're going to end up with Earth is really creating this really exciting cluster of technology that's driven by universities and colleges and the private sector. Other things that we're doing, so that's at the very macro scale, and so that we're looking at a project that's about $6.6 billion of economic growth for the region by 2035. That's what our target is. But then we also move down at a more local scale, and we have this great partnership with the Scarborough Storefront, East End Trades, and an organization like Hammerheads, where we are purposely saying that on all of our major capital projects, we want the local economy to benefit. And what we're doing is we're identifying young people who are interested in trades jobs, and we are employing them through our general contractors as apprentices on our campus. And we have now that baked into all of our contracts. You will not get a contract on a major capital development project at UTSC without a commitment to take on local apprentices. That is now expanding university wide, but we've been sort of at the forefront of this for a number of years now. The other thing that's really important to us is food, and it's a major issue for the Scarborough area. As I joined the meeting, there was discussions about the food banks, and so we've been working with our partners on a food aggregator and trying to bring more local food locally. And how do we leverage our purchasing power as a university who spends hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on purchasing raw ingredients to make food? How do we use that to actually leverage and support local farming operations where they can grow and expand? And that there's a lot of momentum behind this initiative that started at UTSC, and now all these other partners have come in, and we're looking at a much more fundamental approach to creating local food. Yeah, and part of that is actually so many of our community members have never been on a farm. They don't actually know where food comes from, right? And so we had a 10-acre plot of land um, that had been underutilized. We hadn't been doing anything with, and now we've converted that into a campus farm. So we run courses that are out there for our students, but we also do a lot of community engagement. We do summer camps. Well, pre-COVID, we did summer camps that were out there, and just connecting people to where food comes from. And that's now leading us down another path around urban agriculture, where we have some exciting ideas that we're starting to foment, and we can talk about in the future. So, and the other key piece that we're working on is our Indigenous house. And so we have a very large Indigenous community in Scarborough. And I had this personal, very odd experience where my daughter was doing a project on the Seneca, and she was in grade 5 or grade 6, and she was reading about a trading post at the bottom of the mouth of the Rouge River. So she said, could I take her there? It was a Sunday afternoon. She wanted to take some photos to include in her project. So we went there, and there was no recognition of anything indigenous at all at the beach. And then we walked across the bridge to the Pickering side, and there was a bollard with a plaque that was about this big that said, that acknowledged the fact that this was formerly a trading post, and that was it. And it really struck me that there's such a rich history of the Indigenous peoples in this part of the city, but you wouldn't know it. There's this amazing organization at the corner of Galloway and Kingston Road, which is the Native Child and Family Center. Their focus there is really about service delivery and less about education. So we've partnered with people now to create this new Indigenous house, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So that really gives you a bit of a sense as to the micro and macro things that we're working on. And now I'll talk about some of the plans that are coming forward. So in 2008, we started a master planning exercise. And I'm just checking where I'm doing on time. Oh, I'll pick up the pace. I have a few more slides. Am I okay to go a few minutes over, John?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. But I'll go fast. So this will become more of a video than it is a presentation as the slides change quickly. But we started a master planning exercise. And the first step of that exercise was to talk to community members about us and what they thought of us. And it was really clear that people we didn't offend anybody, but they didn't really know what our value was. And they felt that we could use the university as a platform to be loud, to talk about the big ideas, to be bold. And so we took that as a starting point for thinking about how our campus should develop. This is an image of the campus. We are the largest campus in the U of T system. We're about 300 acres, where we have significant valley land. We have our traditional South campus, and then we had a North campus that was basically a large parking lot. And so we thought, how do we think about that campus going forward? And here what we did is I said, so the red lines are all the university property. And what we said was, well, how big an opportunity is this? And my colleagues downtown got really mad when I did this, but I did it anyway. I superimposed the St. George campus, so the U of T downtown campus, on top of this plot of land. And you see the entire U of T campus fits on the plot of land between Ellesmere Avenue and the 401. And it really felt that there was an opportunity for us not to do sort of incremental thinking, but to think big about what a future would look like and what that future would look like over several decades. And then that led to the genesis of this campus master plan, which really talks about where the university is going in the future. We have a number of projects planned on the campus right now, and I'll walk through some of those projects now. So the first is we're doing a new student residence project, and some of you are aware of this, and I've given a few presentations. And every project we do, we try to do something very innovative with. This project is really innovative because it's a passive house project. It is going to consume about between 75 and 80% less energy to heat, cool this project than any other project of this size or scale. And if you think about it, it's 70 to 80%. The idea that we're doing here is we're actually bringing in vendors, experts, manufacturers of products to drive the creation of this highly efficient building. And we're hoping that as we've done this and demonstrated that we could build it at this scale, condo developers and others begin to step in and say, you know what, we can actually do innovative projects for our student residents. I apologize if you hear the dog barking and my daughter yelling at the dog to stop barking, but this is the reality that we live in a COVID world. Um, so this project is underway. We're also building a new instructional center, a large classroom building that brings together all of our student services. And what's driving this project is innovative new classroom types. And innovative new classroom types. And we're introducing new ways of teaching. And so we have everything from a theater in the round, which is a 500-person round classroom where the instructor stands in the middle. The beauty of this is the furthest person in this classroom is only 7 rows away from the instructor. So you can actually interact and read people's faces as opposed to being in a big sea of people. Um, and so we're using the building itself to change the way that people teach with these innovative classrooms. We're creating great student places where students can hang out and interact with. I talked a little bit about Indigenous House, and as we're building it, it will be the hub for Indigenous activities on our campus, but it's also intended to be a hub for Indigenous education for our community. The vision has been that we will have groups of grade 6 children coming and spending half a day at UTSC um, to learn about the Indigenous histories of our lands and of the Indigenous ways of knowings of our original peoples, but they also come to a university. So there's going to be grade 6s that have never thought about university or never having stepped foot on a university who will come to a university campus and say, yeah, I've been to a university. I could think about that in my future. We're also building, as we're building in parking lots, we're building a new parking structure. And so how do you do an innovative parking structure? Well, our approach on this project is we are going to build a parking structure out of wood. And why? Because it's a renewable resource. And uh, this parking structure will be about 40,000 tons of displaced carbon, right? And so for us, we harvest the wood, we build the parking structure, we replant a forest that is harvestable again, and we're embedding carbon in this project. It creates a world of complexity from city zoning and city planning because no one's seen a parking structure made out of wood this size in Canada. They've been done in Europe, but they haven't been done in Canada. Um, but this is trying to break the wave of and bring a new technology to the fore that can be used for offices and classrooms to build at a scale that no one's built that yet. We're also building the Scarborough Academy of Medicine, which is an exciting project for us, which is going to now train physicians, and those physicians are intended to stay in the Scarborough region to deal with a significant healthcare problem that we've seen through the pandemic, where a lot of the residents in Scarborough receive their primary healthcare through walk-in clinics, and that's not a good thing. I apologize, I'm going so fast, but I will do my best to finish quickly. The other project we're working on is to building an arts center, and it will be the home to a number of our arts programs, but it also tries to bring together literature, arts, media, and performance all in one place, and to be a bit of an anchor. And it was amazing watching Dwayne this morning, or this earlier today. He's an amazing guy. He's an amazing artist. There are so many truly amazing artists in Scarborough, but you'd never know. And so part of what we see with this art center is it becoming a magnet that actually begins to tell the story of Scarborough artists and gives them a place to be connected to. We're also building a large vertical farm with Centennial College where we're really trying to pilot the technologies so that they can be commercialized. And so urban farming and vertical farming is becoming massive issues in really densely populated urban areas like Singapore. How do you get fresh food? Well, you can grow things inside, but you need an innovator to drive what that actually looks like and to deal with crops and so forth. So we're working through that. And we're also doing a lot to respond to community need. I'm almost finished. So in April, when the COVID pandemic hit, uh, Scarborough was really struggling for food security issues. And the councillor McKelvey called me and said, how do we do something to help this? And in a partnership with the city, we mobilized with Global Medic to convert our Highland Hall into the CARES program, which was CARES stood for Collective Action and Response for Everyone in Scarborough. And we brought volunteers into Highland Hall. Global Medic brought in large quantities of bulk food, and we repackaged food into 1 pound bags and distributed it to over 50 food banks. In total, we did about 170,000 pounds of food that were distributed to food banks in Scarborough um, and in Durham. We also put together hygiene kits with soap, water, toothpaste, all the kind of stuff that you need to have to give you some sort of dignity. And we ran that project completely through volunteers. And we had community members and students and faculty all volunteering to pull this together. There was then another community need, which had to do with COVID testing, and just as the weather got cold, they needed more, and the COVID started increasing in numbers. So we took that space and we converted it into a partnership with Scarborough Health Network to do COVID testing on campus. And we were doing between 800 and 1,000 COVID tests on campus for the community. The intent was to open or operate until April 21st because we thought COVID would be cured. No, I'm kidding. We didn't. But that was just sort of a ballpark. But we're now working with the Scarborough Health Network to transition that again into a vaccine center. And so the plan is in a partnership with Centennial College, ourselves, and some of our great community partners, the Scarborough Health Network has reached out, and we're all coming together to try to do 1 or 10,000 vaccinations a day. And so the Highland Hall site will become a mass vaccine clinic. But at the same time, we're expecting a surge in COVID to come again towards the end of March. So we may leave our site up as a testing center until we have the big orders of vaccine coming in, and then convert it into a vaccination center. But this all goes to show you that in this particular partnership, we have this global need. We have anchor institutions, the college, the university, the hospital, picking up the phone and making this happen. People are trying to do this all over the province. It's a complete disaster everywhere. This one has moved so smoothly because we've been working together for so long that we have relationships. We can mobilize things very quickly. I have great confidence that this is going to be successful provincially, but I think everyone is going to start to turn to how we've done it here in Scarborough because it's gone so well. So just in closing, a couple things. We as anchors, I think we're in a position to support economic recovery in our region. And that's both at the micro level about how we think about local procurement, food security and jobs, and at the macro level with things like the Earth Project, the Scarborough Academy of Medicine and Integrated Health, and then our art center. One of the things that we are doing is we're also very focused on supporting inclusivity. As a matter of fact, you may or may not know that we at UTSC hosted a national dialogue on anti-Black racism in the academics. And we are now in the process of crafting what will be the Scarborough Charter, which is a commitment that all universities in Canada will sign on to in support of anti-Black racism. We're also focused on things like health and wellness, education, investing, infrastructure, and advocacy. And I apologize I went so far over time, but I think that's it for me, and I'm happy to have a discussion if people have questions.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrew. I have lived in Scarborough for 45 years now, and I would rename your presentation the best unknown story about Scarborough potential, because you already highlighted some significant things that's going to be a wow factor for many people who have lived in Scarborough. What I'd like to do next then is open up a few questions to the floor. What you could do is post your questions in the chat, and I will re-communicate it to Andrew. But so while you do that, let me ask Andrew the very, very first question. So Andrew, this is very, very exciting. So it really comes down to how do what is being done to communicate this storyboard, this potential that you see and your colleagues see at UTSC? What are we doing to communicate it to the broader Scarborough community so we create this environment of hope? Because hope is important in our current environment, and knowing that the people working on something this important, this big, what's being done on communications?
That's to be honest, that's part of a challenge, because One of the issues that we have since Scarborough became amalgamated with the city is it's one city. So the infrastructure that's in place is really citywide, but it's never very focused on Scarborough. There is no separate Scarborough media. There is no separate. There's the Scarborough Mirror, for example. But I think this is a key area where we need community groups and partners like Scro to help us tell the story and to find those platforms, right? And that is for us, it's a real challenge. I'll tell you one quick story. I was invited with the then principal Bruce Kidd by the mayor to go down about an announcement about the LRT. And so Bruce and I, and this was years ago when we were going to have an LRT, Bruce and I went, and there was this great talk, and we were so pumped and excited. And it was on the concourse of City Hall, so just above council chambers. And as we got into the elevator to go down, Bruce and I got into an elevator. There's a bunch of reporters there, and as the elevator is going down, you hear them say, like, "Why are we putting money into Scarborough? Like, what? We're going to go clubbing there in 15 years?" And that's the attitude that exists, right? Like the Don Valley seems to separate the real Toronto from us. And then, the other part of the problem is that we interact with Durham constantly. Like for people to go to Costco, you go into Durham to go to Costco because it's closer than the one in the far side of Scarborough. But Durham sees us as Toronto. So we're sort of caught in no man's land. We're east of the Don Valley Parkway and we're west of the Rouge River. And so we're kind of this perfect place where everyone can talk about and everyone can ignore, right? And so the question you ask is bang on. How do we tell people these amazing things that we're doing in Scarborough and actually get people to hear it, right?
Okay, great. Dave, you have a question? Dave Hardy?
Oh, yes, Andrew, phenomenal presentation. I'm so impressed what you and your team at UTSC are doing, and also all the other anchors are doing. I'm blown away. I'm so impressed. I will ask though, you're in the same space as Ontario Power Generation as well. They have 7,000 employees. They have some of the most progressive environmental sustainability strategies in the world, and the most progressive, far-reaching climate change policies in the world. And they're starting a huge mega project as well with the next stage for Pickering. So I just seeing an opportunity for you to even reach out further to OPG and as a partner as well. I don't know if you ever thought about it, but as you're speaking, I go, wouldn't that be a phenomenal partnership?
Great thought, Dave. And I'm happy to connect with OPG. They're place-based. They have many of the same key issues as the other anchor institutions. They do have an economic model that's different than the rest of us. So I think it's slightly different than what we are. We're all sort of not-for-profit institutions, and they're very much for profit. But I'm happy to reach out. I think it's a great idea. I will follow up with them, particularly on the Earth Initiative. I think they might be very interested in, right? Thanks for that, Dave.
Andrew, another question came up. It looks as if from your chart, it looks like a lot of development was happening south of the 401. And one of the questions was, are we going to forget our neighbors in the north of the 401? Malvern, that type.
I would love, so first off, my daughter's cheer gym is just north of the 401. So she's very cautious that I don't do anything to interfere with her cheerleading gym. But there's a whole pocket of land that's up just west, or just east of Morningside as you go past the 401, where there's development opportunities. And there's this great example of Tesla. Tesla had set up its shop across the street from a university. And why did they do that? Because they wanted the knowledge strength and the human resource strength from the university to be a feeder for them. And so they got professors who were innovators, they got students who were graduates, they got summer students to drive things. And I would love to see development happen in there that's led through the city and has private investors coming in that are thinking about how those lands can really create a manufacturing or innovation hub that draws on the university to do really remarkable things. The lands up there are underutilized, and one of the things that we did as we were doing Earth is we looked at a lot of the industrial lands that are in Scarborough, and I've got lots of slides that talk about those lands. But those lands are really underutilized right now. They're meant to be large employment areas, and they're not employing a lot of people because there isn't the driver for what those jobs would be. You'll see there's a lot of religious organization, churches, and things happening on industrial lands. And a big reason for that is it's relatively inexpensive for the churches to afford. And the property owners don't have to pay property tax on it because it's been used for religious purposes. So those land values grow and there's no tax base. But it would, not that I want to displace churches and displace religious organizations, but those lands are really designed to be places of employment. And if you think about living at Kennedy and Eglinton and working at Birchmount and St. Clair, think about your commute. Think about what that actually does to the environment. Think about the fact that you may be able to get home um, to see your kids' basketball game. Where we are in Scarborough, and these conversations came up years ago with even Dave, you'll recall some of them. We have people who live in Malvern who work at the airport. It's an hour and a half to 2.5 hours to get to work, an hour and a half to 2.5 hours to get home. So you're leaving at 5 o'clock in the morning, you're getting home at 9 o'clock at night, and you're not being able to spend any family time with anybody. Imagine if that same job was located 10 minutes away from work, and what that does to the quality of life and the experiences that people have. So I think the more that we can work with municipal, provincial, federal partners on mobilizing these lands and in creating places where people can work that create hope for people, I think the better we will all do.
Thank you, Andrew. There's another question. This one is on the subway. 25% of the city's population, 20% of the city's geography, less than 5% of the city's TTC subway system.
Yeah, and one of the crazy things that we talked about, I remember having this conversation with Jennifer Keesman when she got herself into political problems and we were trying to help her. We did some work about people who take the TTC in Scarborough. So generally the thinking is if you're living on the subway line, it's because you work downtown because the finance jobs are down there, the banking jobs are down there, the law office jobs are down there, the hospitals are all down there. So people think of the transit as a way to get downtown. In Scarborough, the reality is only 22% of people that board a TTC bus have a destination of downtown. People are using the TTC to get around their neighborhood, to get to a doctor's office, a doctor's appointment, to get to grade school or high school, to go grocery shopping, to live, right? And so investing in this really great fast access to downtown Toronto is wonderful for some, but it's not what Scarborough riders actually use the TTC for. And so we've always set up this argument to be this polarizing one about, well, Scarborough deserves subway. Sure, subways are great. If you're going downtown, if you're not going downtown, subways are useless, right? Like it could be more express buses, it could be dedicated express bus lanes to move you from one part of Scarborough to another part of Scarborough. Remember, Scarborough has the most people in it and is covering the largest geographic area. And if you don't have a car, Scarborough becomes a really troublesome place to navigate. And the last thing we want to do is to drive more cars. So I agree with the subway comment. Subways are great. I live in Southwest Scarborough. There's a real emphasis on building this downtown relief line so that people who are living on Danforth can get downtown faster and not have to wait for 3 or 4 trains. Versus somebody who in Scarborough who actually needs to get to a doctor's office or needs to go visit a parent to help a parent out, who have to take 3 buses and stand out in the cold. Like it just it doesn't feel right, but the argument never seems to be presented in that way. And I'm probably getting more political than I ought to, but it's been a long day.
Okay. We'll try 2 more questions and then we'll do a wrap up. One question came in here about innovation and the business sub that would be included in this initiative, similar to Y Space at York University.
Yeah, so where we are right now is we are hoping to execute and fully launch and announce the Earth Initiative on Earth Day this year, so April 22nd. That's our target, and and then there'll be a lot more attention that comes to the Earth Initiative. We're still working through some of the details on the relationships between the various academic partners. There will be a number of opportunities, and the way that we're thinking about organizing the clusters are in particular kinds of streams. So there could be stuff around energy, there could be stuff around advanced manufacturing, there could be stuff around production, and then really telling those stories and drawing people into that network and creating a consortium across the spectrum. And what we anticipate is there are going to be companies, and I've already been approached by one company who is basically they're able to deal. Their focus is on building housing, and the way they do housing, and it's up to 6-story affordable housing, but they build it all inside of a plant and then erect it. So they can actually set up, I think they put in place 220 units in 7 weeks. Because they've pre-manufactured everything and assembled it on site. And so then the question will becomes, well, what happens to all of those jobs that would typically be building something like this? Well, those jobs are going to transition. And so what they do is the whole plant is robots, and you need people who are maintaining the robots, who are programming the robots, who are building the components for robots. You will always need carpenters to put the pieces together on a job site, but robots can do a lot of this work. So what this is doing is it's upskilling that workforce. So you're now creating more jobs in supporting automation and robots. And when they came to me, they were looking at either doing something near Hamilton or doing something out east with us. And one of the reasons that they came to us was because the GM plant closure. And the idea was, well, can we repurpose the GM plant and use that to actually manufacture housing, which is what we need. And then COVID struck, so everything kind of went in limbo. But the way that we see this coming together is that we will have streams. This is meant to be a fully inclusive exercise. We want as many people at various tables and voices as we can, because that's really what's going to drive the change.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, we have time for one more question, and I may not have gotten to all the questions. So if someone from the floor wants to, if they haven't heard their question or want to ask one more question to Andrew, just speak up, please.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Stacy, I'll keep it short. I wanted to have a question and suggestion. Will there be a social media campaign that could be UTSC alumni-led, Scarborough-led, just to have at least some online conversation about this great project? I think it's a phenomenal initiative, and maybe that might be a way to raise awareness.
Great point, Stacey. Which initiative, like the Earth Project in particular, or more broadly the whole anchor piece?
Yeah, the whole piece. Yeah.
I would love for there to be a social media campaign. I think if I were to run that from the university, it would look too self-serving. So if there was an organization, say, I don't know, something like an organization that was focused on community renewal, that wanted to begin a campaign that we could contribute to, I think that would be.
Well, I was more thinking of the student groups within the campus so that it's more youth-led and they're somehow engaged with that process in addition to the Scarborough Renewal.
I agree. I think somehow if we could get a campaign launched that many people can contribute to, that would be a great thing to do. It just seems a bit self-interested, and maybe it's me, and maybe it's I shouldn't be so concerned about that, but it just feels like if the more that we can tell a community story, that we're all on the same page, that the community organizations, the anchor institutions, everyone is kind of driving in this direction, it gets momentum. It becomes that unstoppable force. Right. And so I think it's a great idea. I'm happy to talk offline about how we want to position the start of that campaign. But I think it's a really exciting story. And to be honest, people in Scarborough have been hit really hard by the pandemic. And we know that it's hit harder in diverse communities, Black communities. We have so many people in the service industry living in Scarborough who have had to go to work every day. Like 28.5% or 28.8% positivity rate in Scarborough versus an 8% average in the city. That's telling us something really, really important, right? And I think if there's things that we can do to offer some glimmer of hope and some positivity for what's happening in Scarborough, so we're not just getting labeled again. Years ago, many of you recall, they would report Scarborough murders all the time, right? Like it was always, oh, another murder happened in Scarborough, and now it's Scarborough deaths because of the pandemic. So somehow having a positive view of the amazing things that happen in Scarborough that no one knows about would be, I think, a great thing for us to work together on.
Okay, well, I think we'll close there because we need to give Andrew a chance to rest his back. Hopefully that gets better soon. So Andrew, just want to take this opportunity to really thank you. You clearly are the type of leader that we've been looking for in Scarborough, and I know it's not just you, and you have a team behind you, and I know that. Sorry, and I know the scroll vision is for a strong and prosperous Scarborough. So I'm sure my colleagues on the call here tonight will take up this idea of participating in some sort of social campaign. But we do really appreciate your time. We know you're a very busy person. And, thank you very much.
And thank you very much. The work that you guys are doing is so incredibly important. So thank you.
Okay, and I just before we close, I just want to announce that our next next meeting would be on March the 4th, and our featured speaker would be Elizabeth Buller, who is the president and CEO of the Scarborough Health Network. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you again for all those that helped made this possible in preparing, Jared and Mark, and good night, good evening to everyone.